Times of stress and family drama, and having all of this play out on the international stage is just really regrettable, it seems. But is Mr. Markle, Meghan's father, having heart surgery today?
Well, Alison, you hit the nail on the head. This has been the most extraordinary 48 hours with will he, won't he, will he. It appears today we are back on he won't, because according to TMZ, none of this has been corroborated, but TMZ is reporting that Mr. Markle has informed them that he's going to be undergoing heart surgery today, which of course will leave him too ill to attend the wedding on Saturday. We're hoping that this is the final definitive answer, because of course for Meghan this has been an incredibly stressful week in a build-up to what should be a very happy occasion. So hopefully this is the final answer so that we can all move on and Meghan can start to enjoy the friends and family that have started flying into town.
I mean, it's hard not to think, Victoria, that this is somehow the result of this very stressful week that he's had, just to catch people up. As you know, he made this, what he says was a regrettable decision to participate with, to sell photos, staged photos of himself, preparing for the wedding to the paparazzi. And he then thought that the photos looked hammy and corny, and he regretted it. And, but look, it sounds like he was trying to control the narrative after the paparazzi had been following him around, showing him purchasing beer and things like that. Meghan Markle's older half-sister, with whom she's not close, hasn't spoken to in years, went on TV yesterday to try to defend her father. So listen to this moment.
I feel that the red carpet should have been rolled out for him. I was never jealous or judging or meaning to hurt or criticize her, but I love my dad. I've been his daughter since 1964, and I gotta say, I think a lot of daughters would rise to dad's defense, and I feel like she could have been doing more early on. The paparazzi would have never gotten to him, and a lot of this perhaps would not have happened.
I don't know if the paparazzi would never have gotten to him, but Victoria, what have Harry and Meghan's response been to all of this, or Buckingham Palace's?
Well, Kensington Palace simply released a very short, minimal statement the day this story first broke, just saying that they were pleading for respect and understanding for Mr. Markle. But it's incredibly difficult to feel sympathy for Samantha Markle. She has been a train wreck since this engagement was announced. She's changed her narrative. She's changed the story. She seems to love playing the victim, which is grossly unfair to Meghan. I think she and Harry have tried to support Mr. Markle as best they can, but I think he made some poor choices, some bad decisions. He got caught up in a situation that was bigger than him, and I think probably didn't fully understand the repercussions. He now has to live with those consequences, but I'm not sure that the Markle family really deserve our sympathy. Mr. Markle, certainly, if he is going through a health crisis, he really needs everyone's support and respect, and I'm sure some privacy over the coming days. But you do have to feel very sorry for Meghan this week, because as you rightfully pointed out before, this is happening on the global stage. It is deeply humiliating, deeply embarrassing. She's marrying into the royal family. She's very conscious of keeping respect for the Queen, and I think she's just embarrassed that her family has led to this catastrophically enormous story.
And then, of course, there's also the tragically ironic piece of this, which is, once again, the paparazzi, ruining something. Well, not ruining, but certainly getting in the way of something. And, of course, it just brings up the specter of what happened with Harry and Princess Diana and the paparazzi's role in all of that. And it just feels that is just a sad note. So on a happy note, Victoria, let's end on what the palace has put out in terms of...
Let's end on a happy note.
Okay, who will be in the bridal party? They've just announced it this morning, and these two cutie pies that we're about to pull up, the bridesmaids will be children, I guess led by Charlotte, and the page boys will also obviously be children, led there by George. What else do we know?
Well, we have 10 children ranging in ages from 2 till 7. So can you say organised chaos, albeit the adorable form of chaos? The party is made up of 6 bridesmaids, 4 page boys. They are godchildren of the couple. They're family members, George and Charlotte, niece and nephew of Harry, and also their children's friends' children. The Mulroneys have got 3 children included in this bridal party. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. There is not an adult bridesmaid, as we know, going to be there corralling these children. So I think they're going to perhaps if anyone's going to upstage the bride, it could be this group of 10, but they're going to be very sweet.
Okay, Victoria, I will look forward to seeing you in a couple of days. Thank you very much for the reporting. So on Friday, I will be live from Windsor to preview the royal wedding here on New Day. And then on Saturday, we'll be live for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's special day. Royal wedding coverage starts Saturday morning at 4 a.m. Eastern on CNN. So everybody set your alarm clocks for that. Thanks to our international viewers for watching. For you, CNN Talk is next. For our U.S. viewers, New Day continues right now. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to your New Day. Here's our top story. North Korea threatening to abandon its high-profile summit with President Trump next month. The rogue regime says it will not be put in a corner on nuclear abandonment. This announcement comes after North Korea abruptly called off high-level talks with Seoul in protest of these joint military drills that are being conducted by the U.S. and South Korea.
CNN learning the White House was caught off guard by North Korea's sudden about-face. So far, the White House hasn't responded to this latest statement, but earlier said officials are coordinating closely with our allies as the summit hangs in the balance. Or does it? Let's begin our coverage with CNN's Ivan Watson live in Seoul with the latest. What do we know, my friend?
Good morning, Chris. North Korean state media has just put out another statement criticizing the U.S. for these joint Air Force exercises with South Korea, accusing the U.S. of arrogant, provocative acts, bringing in what they describe as nuclear assets, B-52s and F-22 jets here to the region. And we've all got whiplash here because for months, North Korea has been sending conciliatory messages, syncing up the time zones between North and South Korea, establishing hotlines and talking directly to the U.S. So it's leading analysts to wonder, is this some kind of a bargaining tactic, or is North Korea really prepared to follow through on its threat to pull out of what could be potentially a historic summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump next month in Singapore? North Korea threatening to cancel next month's high-profile summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, stressing in a statement, quote, "If they try to push us into the corner and force only unilateral nuclear abandonment, we will no longer be interested in that kind of talks, and we will have to reconsider whether we will accept the upcoming North Korea-U.S. summit." The rhetoric echoing earlier threats from President Trump.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go.
North Korea's vice foreign minister asserting that they will never follow the path of Libya and Iraq, criticizing President Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, by name, seemingly referencing these remarks.
Is it a requirement that Kim Jong-un agree to give away those weapons before you give any kind of concession?
I think that's right. I think we're looking at the Libya model of 2003, 2004.
North Korea's warning coming after they first cast doubt on the summit when they suspended separate high-level talks with South Korea scheduled for today. The North Koreans citing their anger over joint U.S.-South Korea military drills. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert defending the joint military exercises as the news broke.
They're exercises that are legal, they're planned well in advance.
Aides tell CNN that the announcement caught the White House off guard. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders releasing a brief statement noting, "We are aware of the South Korean media report. The United States will look at what North Korea has said independently and continue to coordinate closely with our allies." President Trump ignoring questions about the summit after visiting the First Lady in the hospital.
Will you meet with Kim Jong-un, sir? Will you still meet with him? Will you go to Singapore?
The sudden step backward coming after North Korea released 3 detained Americans last week, and after months of what appeared to be warming relations on the Korean peninsula and with the United States.
Kim Jong-un he really has been very open and I think very honorable from everything we're seeing.
Kristen Ellison, this is what's so confusing about this. Last month, the U.S. and South Korea had bigger joint military annual exercises, and North Korea didn't complain. Also, just yesterday, North Korea was inviting South Korean journalists to attend a ceremony it says will take place next week for the dismantling of its main nuclear testing facility. And the watchdog group 38 North was publishing satellite photos dating back to May 7th showing what they claim are the first steps of dismantling that facility. South Korea, the government here, is trying to play down this reversal in tone from North Korea, calling them growing pains in what is a very complicated process of trying to establish peace here on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay,
Allison,
Ivan,
Chris?
thank you very much for all of that reporting. Let's bring in our panel to discuss it. We have CNN political analyst John Avlon and author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, and Daily Beast columnist Gordon Chang. Gordon, let me start with you. So is this the typical dance that North Korea is doing, or is there something bigger here?
Well, I think that there certainly are patterns to North Korean behavior, and this does come out of the playbook. But there are other things that I think are really disturbing. So, for instance, we have seen a marked deterioration in China's sanctions enforcement, and you saw Kim Jong-un, the North Korean ruler, going to see Xi Jinping, his Chinese counterpart, twice in a row in China. That's the Chinese summoning him. And I think actually Beijing said, look, we're going to support you. And we have seen evidence of that. For instance, gas prices in the northern part of North Korea dropped dramatically this month, an indication that China is sanctions busting. The other thing, though, is ZTE. You know, on Sunday, President Trump had that really awful tweet about ZTE, the embattled Chinese telecom equipment manufacturer. Basically, he wilted under Chinese pressure, giving in to Chinese demands, as we've heard on your show. And I think that Kim Jong-un said, look, you know, the Chinese just humiliated the American president. Why don't I humiliate him as well? And I think this was an opportunity where really, when you have bad policy on the part of the president in one area, it just sort of it transmits over to another.
That's an interesting take. So, all right, let's deal with this as a point of synthesis, Brother Avlon. Is the media getting a little hot and bothered about something that's more the latest than it is new? Yes. This is what was expected by North Korea. They're going to engage in brinkmanship the same way that Trump did early on, saying, I'll walk away if it's not my deal. Okay, so we're getting a little too hot and bothered. Fine. But this point of Gordon's, maybe that's an explanation for what we just saw with Trump and ZTE in China. Maybe it is part of a larger strategy that he needs their help enough on the North Korean peninsula, that U.S. administration is worried enough about their relative leverage that he is trying to butter them up and give them some things that maybe he shouldn't to try to get this other deal done.
Well, that's always been a factor in you know, what is otherwise a total contradiction of Trump's traditional position. He does need China to help get North Korea, the negotiations to go smoothly. I think if there's one thing that Donald Trump loves, clearly it's to be described as wilting under pressure, as Gordon just described. But look,
no wilting. Oh, there's no pressure.
Yeah.
You're the wilter.
You're the wilter. But look, you know, I think this is not surprising. Dictator's going to dictate. This is what North Korea does. And this is why Secretary of State Pompeo said, even coming back from the last round of negotiations, we've got our eyes wide open. North Korea's promises are not worth the paper the propaganda is written on. And they're going to throw a brushback pitch. It doesn't necessarily mean the negotiation is scuttled. It's not necessarily about the North Korea drills, the South Korean drills with the United States. But I do think Bolton's comments on the Sunday shows were significant, in which he said we were saying the standard is complete denuclearization before any benefits being seen. That's all stick, no carrot for the North Koreans. So it's not surprising they're going to push back. And they even called him out in the statement, saying we view him with total repugnance, which is a bit of an old school North Korean propaganda line.
Gordon, I do want to ask you about that. How much of this is the Bolton effect? Since there seems to be no love lost on either side, because as John points out, they did put out this statement. We shed light on the quality of Bolton already in the past, and we do not hide our feelings of repugnance towards him. And so the fact that Bolton used the Libya model on the Sunday show, is that what you think has most aroused their ire?
You know, I think this is an excuse on the part of the North Koreans, but, you know, that language about the Libyan model took me back when I heard it, and it really wasn't necessary at this particular time. You know, we got to remember that the substance of what Bolton said is really the same as the substance of what Trump has said, and also the new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and it's probably pretty good policy. But nonetheless, there are ways that you can communicate these things, and I think that what we hear in the administration really is that they were just needling the North Koreans. The North Koreans, as John said, they were going to send this brushback pitch, but they didn't really have to, the administration really didn't have to do it in a way that would just aggravate the situation.
Let's talk one more step about the Libya model, because it was very provocative. What do we know about what happened in Libya? They were told, you're going to give us everything right off the bat. Then the Obama administration bombed there like crazy. Didn't go to Congress. It's a whole other discussion I love to have. And then Gaddafi went bye-bye. Yeah, that's a tough model to have lined up as your potential future.
I think that's a euphemism.
Libya in dictator shorthand of sort of dictator's rational self-interest is they didn't pursue nukes, they were persuaded not to do it, and he died anyway. So the whole rationale for nuclear aspiring dictators is that they need the deterrent to ensure the stability of their regime. That's the calculus. So when you float Libya, that's basically saying, you're going to give up your nukes and things aren't going to end well for you and your family. That's not the carrot you need to get them to move on nukes.
So, Gordon, what happens if Kim Jong-un decides he doesn't want to do this meeting?
Well, I think that's okay, because what the United States should do is, first of all, it tighten sanctions on North Korea, but more important, tighten sanctions on China, because, I've always thought, if the meeting with Kim goes well, we can just ignore China's aberrant behavior. But if it goes poorly, and your question is, what if we don't have that summit, then yeah, I think that we have to start imposing costs on the Chinese, going after their money laundering banks, going after the other sanctions violations we've seen in the last 2 months. We just can't let it go unnoticed, because if we do that, then we're in a world of hurt when China, not just on North Korea, not just on trade, but everything.
All right, on that note, Gordon Chang, John Avlon, thank you both very much. All right, now to some weather. There have been brutal spring storms in the Northeast, and they've turned deadly. The storms killing at least 2 people, including an 11-year-old girl in Newburgh, New York, who died when a tree crushed a car. The storms knocking out power to nearly 500,000 customers in 5 states. The National Weather Service says there were dozens of reports of hailstorms. Heavy rain turned streets into rivers in Frederick County, Maryland, leading to dozens of water rescues from cars that were stalled out. 85 people there were also rescued from a stranded double-decker commuter train. Ay, ay, ay.
One of the rare times you had tornado warnings in New York City. A deadly explosion at a Southern California medical facility is being investigated as a criminal act. A law enforcement source telling CNN the incident appears to be intentional. A woman lost her life. 3 others were injured in the blast. Alyssa Viejo. That's where it happened. So 2 people are now in critical condition. There's no indication of any threats made before the blast.
President Trump says his wife Melania is doing, quote, really well after a medical procedure, and he expects her to be home from the hospital in 2 or 3 days. The president visited the First Lady again Tuesday at Walter Reed Medical Center, where she is recovering after undergoing treatment for a benign kidney condition.
Israel facing global backlash as its troops kill dozens of Palestinians protesting in Gaza. What could Israel have done differently? Should things have been done differently? This is getting more focused, and we're going to take you deeper next.
No holds barred.
Out front tonight, hypocrite in chief. So let me just put it to you straight, Senator. Senate Democrats, they're getting their...
The demand's ridiculous. President Trump has already caved on one of those demands, instructing his Commerce Department to help the Chinese tech company ZTE get back in business. Joining us now is CNN political analyst and columnist for The Washington Post, Josh Rogin. Key booking, he broke this story and got the list we're about to show you. And American Enterprise Institute resident scholar Derek Scissors. Now, Derek doesn't just have an amazing name. He also consulted for the Trump administration on China policy in the past. Gentlemen, thank you. Josh, congratulations to you. Important information. Let's put it up on the screen. All right, it's a big list of different things. But here, there are 4 pages of different things, all right? And we'll scroll through them. Josh, do us a favor and give us the flavor of the kinds of things China is looking for.
Well, basically what the Chinese government has demanded is that the U.S. government, the Trump administration, abandon its project to confront China's economic aggression and hand over the keys of the U.S. economy to the Chinese Communist Party and its related industries. And you look at these demands and the sheer audacity of them. I mean, let's take the first one. Eliminate the Tiananmen Square sanctions, which would require the Trump administration to certify that China is a good actor in human rights, which flies against all facts and evidence that exist. I mean, it's just preposterous. And then if you go down the list more, you see that they want to be involved in our infrastructure projects, and they want to be able to have free reign over our technology sectors. And these are things that the Trump administration, if you had asked me Saturday, I would have said there's no way that they would agree to. But then on Sunday, we get a tweet, and all of a sudden Trump seems to have agreed to one of their key demands, which is to let one of their worst actors, ZTE, off the hook for busting sanctions on Iran and North Korea. And that raised the question both inside and outside the administration of what the heck is going on here? What is the Trump administration doing? And it sends a signal to the Chinese that the Trump administration doesn't have the stomach to fight this long economic battle that is definitely coming with China, and it's bad negotiating. It sort of sends mixed messages and just leaves a lot of people scratching their heads.
All right, so let's engage that scratch a little bit, Derek. The idea of why is the Trump administration doing something like helping ZTE when you have these extant issues of them abusing intellectual property and doing things that they're not supposed to do to create unfair advantage? Do you believe this is about a larger strategy, or do you have questions about whether or not there's some link between Chinese funding of Trump projects and his now newfound leniency towards them?
I don't think there's a link to the funding of the projects. That project is several years old. There was Chinese involvement in it several years ago. It still hasn't gotten off the ground. I don't think that's the story here. I do think the story here is the president made a serious mistake. First of all, he interfered in a U.S. legal process, which you should not do while you're bargaining with the Chinese. They shouldn't be able to change how we're going to apply U.S. law. And second, he gave away the one action that the Trump administration has taken that has actually hurt China before the negotiations have started. That doesn't sound like art of the deal. So we have a bargaining mistake and we have a political mistake. I don't think there's any connection to the Chinese participating in a project in Indonesia.
But why would he do something, Derek, that is so obviously inimical to the momentum you had before and the stated proposition of what would create balance?
Well, I agree with you that it is inimical. I mean, there's a phrase in the president's tweet, too many jobs in China lost. Right. You know, the whole idea was to bring those jobs back to the United States. That's what he ran on. So there's definitely a mistake here. I think he's been listening to people who are afraid of a confrontation with China, people within his administration. I don't know that. It's speculation. But we've been speculating for a while that a group, Josh knows it, they're speculating for a while that a group led by Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin does not want the confrontation with China that the president has ran on and talked about, and they may have won the battle temporarily.
All right, Josh, help us. Put some meat on the bones here. We started off with Trump calling China a rapist, and that was a huge part of his muscled-up campaign talk, right? And now he's doing something that I don't think we would have seen any of the last couple of administrations do. Make sense of it.
Well, President Trump has been saying this since 1989. He believes in his heart of hearts that the Chinese government is screwing us on trade and all sorts of other things. And that's something that he hasn't changed his mind on. What's going on inside the White House is all-out warfare between a camp led by Secretary Mnuchin and National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow on one side, USTR Lighthizer and Peter Navarro on the other side. Wilbur Ross is back and forth. It's hard to tell exactly where he is on any given day. And they're fighting for Trump's attention and for control over this policy. And each of them represents a big set of interests. And when you talk about something as consequential and as generationally important as the overall protection of the U.S. and international economy from Chinese economic aggression, big interests, big moneyed interests are involved. And the finance community is very risk averse. Wall Street doesn't want to see a trade war. The national security community is very concerned, and they don't want to see Chinese technology in American telecom, for example, okay? And both sides can't win, and eventually Trump is going to have to decide whether or not he has the stomach for this fight. And my opinion is that we have no choice but to fight it, and that means engaging with China in these kinds of talks to try to get them to change their behavior, and then if they won't change their behavior, messaging to them clearly that we're going to defend ourselves, and we're not quite there yet. And this was a huge step back in that regard, and one I think that the Trump administration already regrets.
And are you on the same page with Derek that you don't buy the China's financing Trump's deal, so he's being nice to them theory?
No, I think there are hundreds of things going on. I do agree with Eric. There are hundreds of things going on in the U.S.-China relationship. They're not all related all the time. And, because this is such a complicated and big project, we have to be careful not to see boogeyman under every single deal. It's possible there's a connection. Until that's proven, we should be careful, but we should keep our eye on the prize.
Josh, thank you for bringing us the information. I mean, just how bold their asks are give you a good window into what they think their leverage is in this negotiation. And Derek Scissors, nice to add you to the mix. Good to have you. All right, Allison.
Okay, let's talk sports. A huge night for LeBron James, but was it enough to beat the Celtics? We'll find out in the Bleacher Report next.
LeBron James just... This is the future, and it's coming at us faster than we think. From Seattle to Silicon Valley.
60 people dead at the Gaza border. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, defying much of the world by praising Israel's restraint. CNN's Ben Wiedemann is live in Gaza with the latest. What is the situation there this morning, Ben?
The situation this morning, Allison, is quiet. It appears that there are no protests planned at the moment. And it's important to keep in mind that tomorrow is the first day of the holy month of Ramadan, when Muslims refrain from drinking any liquids or eating from sunrise to sunset. So it's not expected during that period that there will be a resumption in any major form of the protests we've seen that have been taking place every week since the 30th of March. So the situation is calm. Now, as far as Nikki Haley's remarks to the United Nations yesterday regarding Israeli restraint, well, certainly it's important to keep in mind it wasn't just death toll is around 110, and certainly having been to those demonstrations, restraint isn't quite how one might describe the Israeli attitude, because, for instance, they are flying those drones that are spewing tear gas well inside Gaza, not the area immediately adjacent to the fence that separates Gaza from Israel, but rather 500, 600, 700 meters inside Gaza. And we saw yesterday one of those drones dropping tear gas on an area where there was a children's playground as well. So there isn't much credence being given to the idea, at least here in Gaza, that Israel is practicing restraint. Chris?
All right, not an easy place to be for the people on the ground or your team. Please be safe. It's calming now, but who knows what happens later in the day. China reportedly giving the Trump administration a list of trade demands. What do they want, and what President Trump has already given them? Next.
Danish design is practical, honest.
What we try to do, that is maybe somewhat...
North Korea threatening to cancel next month's high-profile summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, stressing in a statement, quote, "If they try to push us into the corner and force only unilateral nuclear abandonment, we will no longer be interested in that kind of talks, and we will have to reconsider whether we will accept the upcoming North Korea-U.S. summit." The rhetoric echoing earlier threats from President Trump.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go.
North Korea's vice foreign minister asserting that they will never follow the path of Libya and Iraq, criticizing President Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, by name, seemingly referencing these remarks.
Is it a requirement that Kim Jong-un agree to give away those weapons before you give any kind of concession?
I think that's right. I think we're looking at the Libya model of 2003, 2004.
North Korea's warning coming after they first cast doubt on the summit when they suspended separate high-level talks with South Korea scheduled for today. The North Koreans citing their anger over joint U.S.-South Korea military drills. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert defending the joint military exercises as the news broke.
They're exercises that are legal, they're planned well in advance.
Aides tell CNN that the announcement caught the White House off guard. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders releasing a brief statement noting, "We are aware of the South Korean media report. The United States will look at what North Korea has said independently and continue to coordinate closely with our allies." President Trump ignoring questions about the summit after visiting the First Lady in the hospital.
Will you meet with Kim Jong-un, sir? Will you still meet with him? Will you go to Singapore?
The sudden step backward coming after North Korea released 3 detained Americans last week, and after months of what appeared to be warming relations on the Korean peninsula and with the United States.
Kim Jong-un he really has been very open and I think very honorable from everything we're seeing.
And part of what's so puzzling about this sudden U-turn is less than 24 hours ago, North Korea was inviting South Korean journalists to come up to a ceremony it's scheduled for next week, where it says it is going to show off how it is dismantling its main nuclear testing site. And the watchdog group 38 North just published satellite photos dating back to May 7th of what they said looked like dismantling already beginning at that controversial site. So that makes this change in tone and rhetoric all the more surprising. The South Korean president's office is trying to downplay North Korea's sudden harsh rhetoric, calling it growing pains in what is a complicated process towards trying to get to a better result here on the Korean peninsula. Chris and Allison?
Ivan, appreciate it. Why don't you stay with us and let's bring in CNN political and national security analyst and national security correspondent for the New York Times, Mr. David Sanger. David, I'll tell just by your visage, you're not surprised, you're not rattled, you're not puzzled, and you're not startled. This is what you expected at some point in this process, yes?
That's absolutely right, Chris. I mean, anybody who has followed the history of negotiations with North Korea, and they really date back to the Clinton administration in 1994, has seen every act of this play before, including this one, which is the preemptive sense that they would walk away from the table. You know, President Trump once said in reference to the Iran deal that he would have gotten up and walked away from the table at several points during the negotiations. Well, the North Koreans do one better. They threatened to get up and walk away before the negotiations even started. And this is why those calls for the Nobel were a little premature, because we're a long way from getting this conversation going. I think what was interesting in Ivan's report here, though, is their main objection isn't really the military exercises, which were entirely predictable. It's what John Bolton, the national security advisor, said about following the Libya model. Libya just gave away the material that it had put together. And the North Koreans, when you read into the statement, said, look what happened to the Libyans. Look what happened to the Iraqis. In both cases, they wrote, the whole of their countries fell to big powers. Well, that's not what they have in mind.
So, David, one more question for you. If you've seen this movie before, what is the next act? What happens usually now?
If I had to bet, they will probably have the summit. I don't think the summit's going to be terribly conclusive. It'll be a great photo op. There'll be some agreement on general principles, Allison. But there's a big, long negotiation, and both sides are coming at it from very different positions. You've heard both Mr. Bolton and Secretary of State Pompeo say there'll be no payoff to the North Koreans until everything is turned over. The North Koreans make clear in this statement that's not what they have in mind.
Also, you know, it's great that you pick out the Libya model, because there's also another looming message there, right? Ivan Watson we all know what happened to Gaddafi. So, you know, that's something else that's going to loom large here in terms of what the exigencies are of this. You referred to this, there was a plan to let journalists come and see what is alleged to be the dismantling of one of the nuclear test sites by the North Koreans. We don't know what's going to happen with that. How big a deal is that type of access?
Well, this also isn't the first time we've seen something like that, Chris. This ceremony to dismantle that nuclear testing site, it's almost exactly 10 years ago that North Korea invited journalists, invited CNN, invited U.S. diplomats to witness the very public demolition of a water cooling tower that was part of a uranium enrichment plant where they kind of generate ammunition for nuclear weapons, and that was filmed
filmed, and that was in a period of negotiations. And within a year after that, negotiations have broken down, and North Korea conducted another nuclear test. So it just gives a sense of historical context about how North Korea has engaged in an ebb and flow of talks, and they have gone forwards and backwards in the past, and we may be seeing another iteration of that right now.
David, as you saw, the president didn't respond to the questions that journalists were shouting as he was leaving the First Lady's hospital room yesterday. But I mean, as you know, the narrative has been that President Trump can be unpredictable, and for whatever reason, that has somehow his style has brought Kim Jong-un to the table, and Kim Jong-un can be unpredictable. And thus far, it's worked. But what should President Trump's next move be?
Well, I think the White House has to go into this understanding this is a true negotiation. And in true negotiations, they give up something. In this case, we're asking them to give up the one thing that they view has kept the country independent and kept the Kims running their dictatorial state. And the United States is going to have to give up something as well. And the most interesting part of the statement, Allison, is the reference to there will be no unilateral disarmament. Well, the key word there is unilateral. That means that they're going to have a set of demands, probably about either the American troops on the peninsula or the American habit of running simulated bombing runs using nuclear-capable bombers over the peninsula. And, you know, it's an interesting question. Since the United States can reach any corner of North Korea with a nuclear missile launched from Nebraska, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of disarmament Kim Jong-un has in mind for us. And that is certainly not a discussion, I think, that this White House has entertained seriously that they're going to get into with the North Koreans.
So, David,
but it may be what Kim has in mind.
David, what do you make of this? These couple of points of strategy? One was now that we hear that the president was thinking about pulling people out of South Korea right before the Olympics, which was somehow some kind of suggestion that something could happen. And Bolton being very outspoken about saying, we're going to follow the Libya model. You give us everything or you get nothing. We will bomb. Obama bombed without even going to Congress about it. And then Gaddafi wound up being taken out. What do you take of those indications?
Well, on the first one, President Trump has, over the years, said many times he doesn't understand why the United States has military forces in a country with whom we have with which we have a trade deficit. And he said this during the campaign. It's come back up. I think that he was talked out of it in part because it's not just the military. We only have about 28,000 military in South Korea. We have several 100,000 Americans living there, doing business there, studying there. So I'm not quite sure how you do an evacuation of the city of that size. The second issue on Mr. Bolton is really interesting because I don't know why the United States believes that the North Koreans on faith would give up everything in return for the promise of economic integration. I think it sounds like a great thing to American ears. To the North Koreans, it sounds like being a vassal state. And, of course, Korea over the centuries has been a vassal at various moments of the Japanese, the Chinese, and in many dramas along the way.
All right. Well, stay tuned, as the president would say. David Sanger, Ivan Watson, thank you very much. Now to this big story. This was the data firm that was connected to President Trump's campaign. The report says prosecutors are questioning the firm's former employees and the banks that handled its business dealings. Let's discuss with CNN political analyst John Avlon and associate editor of Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard. John, what took them so long? I mean, Cambridge Analytica.
Right in there.
Listen, just to remind people of what Cambridge Analytica is, because Cambridge Analytica offered to influence their behavior. Its so-called psychographic modeling techniques, which were built in part with the data harvested from Facebook, unknown to the 50 million users, underpinned Cambridge's work for the Trump campaign in 2016.
That's right. And actually, there's some indication they may have reached as many as 87 million Americans. Look, right now, there's been a British National Crime Agency investigation into Cambridge Analytica for bribery, for evidence destruction, for hacking computers. Now the Justice Department seems to be running parallel. In the past, previously, this has not been a Mueller focus. But there's no question they work for the Trump campaign. They misused data. And there's some question about whether they might have been mobbed up in some deeper activity about accessing that data.
And we don't know if it's Mueller focused. We don't know if it's connected to Mueller.
No, we do. That is actually a fair point. Yeah. To date, Mueller has not been focused on Cambridge Analytica.
It is not Mueller focused. I mean, the hearing that they're going to have about it today, AB, and where they're looking at it, this is a straight DOJ probe. The reason it's taking time is because they take time. You have a whistleblower involved in here. You have a guy who was doing his own analytics that was supposedly taken and used for the wrong purposes by Cambridge Analytica. So you have layers, and when you have layers, it's going to take time. Good reminder to people about the Mueller probe. These investigations take time. The question is, how aggressively do you think they pursue this, given that a lot of the fingers that they're going to be finding are going to be pointing at the White House?
That's a good question. The independence of the Department of Justice right now, with all the pressure that they're under from congressional Republicans attacking and trying to discredit the investigation, trying to threaten contempt for the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and also impeachment for Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, is always a factor. Politics has driven the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, to actually release more evidence and intelligence from his investigation that FBI experts say normally would be given to the Congress. So there's that is always going to be overlaying all of this, unfortunately. Cambridge Analytica is intertwined with the Trump campaign in a way that is going to, in the end, I believe, be a part of the Mueller probe. I remember after the famous Nunes memo that was going to change the world 2 months ago, Trey Gowdy, who is the chairman of Government Reform and Oversight, who has seen more intelligence than Trey Gowdy, because he has the authority to, said something very interesting on a Sunday show. They asked, would there be a Mueller probe without this Nunes? Without the FISA warrant, and he said there absolutely would be. And then he mentioned the Trump Tower meeting, and for some reason he mentioned Cambridge Analytica, and it sort of hung out there, and everyone sort of wondered why. If you look at the connection to how Steve Bannon was involved in the campaign, how Jared Kushner sat for a huge magazine profile and bragged about what he was able to do as the king of data in the Trump campaign through Cambridge Analytica, there's no way it is not going to be at least part of, in the end, the Mueller.
That's right. Bannon's on the board. Kushner's king of data, and the Mercers are the big funders.
Okay, next topic. Let's talk about what sounds like the beginnings of a possible plan to, when undocumented immigrants show up at the U.S. border, to separate them from their children. Children would be held possibly in military bases, and parents would be processed separate from them. And so here's what Kirstjen Nielsen, Director of Homeland Security, said when she was challenged about, is this the example of your philosophy on using this as a deterrent?
It is the law, as you know. And, I had an exchange last week with a different senator that tried to cut me off and said, well, I know this is your philosophy. And I said, ma'am, it's not a philosophy, it's the law. If you enter our country illegally, we will refer you for prosecution, we will prosecute you. But as you know, for every sob story, we have 73% border assault increase. We have people like Kate Steinle. I mean, where is the compassion for the flip side of this conversation?
I think a conversation about compassion that's predicated upon defending, separating children from their parents and putting children on military bases is fundamentally flawed. Are you trying to be a dystopian Disney character? I mean, there right now is capacity for 10,500 children on this military base. Now, if there are 20 kids in a kindergarten classroom, that's 500 kindergarten classes being policed by soldiers. Right? For a party that allegedly believes that government doesn't do a lot right, having soldiers babysit children separated from their parents, probably not the best moment in our history.
All right, so you got to give it a little broader context. We've been here before. We remember the roundups of the kids down on the border at the end of the Obama administration.
Not a good moment.
They have held kids in military installations before.
But weren't those unaccompanied minors? Wasn't that different? They showed up as unaccompanied minors.
That's true. But that's
separated.
Right. However, they're talking about both right now.
Sure.
They're talking about when kids show up, what do you do to them? What do you do with families? Look, You can argue that it's not a compassionate way to do it. You can argue that what Nielsen is saying there is somewhat disingenuous because you do have a choice whether or not to prosecute it. You can treat it criminally. You can treat it civilly. It's up to them. So there is discretion there. But AB, this is a hard problem to deal with. That, to your point about compassion, once you decide to prosecute people who are coming across the border, you have to separate the kids from the adults. You can't keep them both in the same places. You don't have the capacity. You're at over 90% capacity now with the facilities they have. So what can you do with the families if you're going to prosecute them? How is there any
But why
other
can't
option?
you keep the parents also at the military base? Why do you have to
If you
separate
have the capacity, you have capacity.
They could argue that with limited capacity, they can turn everyone away, that the child doesn't have to be separated from their parent. They don't have to come in at all. And the thing is that because the Obama administration used the same military bases in, I believe, 3 separate states in the child migrant crisis of 2014, the argument goes away that if it's an overcapacity argument and they literally have nowhere for them, and the choice is to turn them away or put them on a military base, that argument goes away. It's a question of the separation of the families. They want a deterrent. This administration is seeking a deterrent. And you know what? A lot of people in this country want a stronger deterrent. They were happy last year when we had 64% reduction in border crossings. They would like them to never come here to begin with so that there isn't a debate about this separation. There was support in the spring of 2014 for comprehensive immigration reform, some kind of path to legalization, if not citizenship, over 60% in this country. And that plummeted down into the 40s after that summer, after the mishandled child migrant crisis that the Obama administration wasn't even entirely truthful about and really mishandled. And this is more popular than people accept, the fact that maybe they should be turned away altogether.
But drill down on the question of whether parents and children should be separated at the border. Attorney General Sessions is arguing specifically that this is intended as a deterrent. Parents don't cross over. We're going to charge you with child, trafficking. That should be a deterrent to not have you here. But then you have the additional responsibility to start separating children from their parents, and that's not what America stands for.
I also reject the notion that if you care about these children, you don't care about Kate Steinle. No, we actually are capable of having compassion for both.
Yes, of course.
But Kate Steinle has always been a gross misappropriation of the tragedy that ended her life. It doesn't meet with the facts of the situation. The facts of what happened to Katie Steinle only make sense on one level, which is but for that guy being in this country when he shouldn't have been, she would have never died. But the facts of it, he was not, the idea of what he was painted as, that there is a monster in our midst and there's so many just like him, the facts don't line up on it. And it's always been a gross abuse of the situation, but you still have the same problem. When you prosecute a family for anything, forget about immigration.
You separate them out.
You separate the adults from the kids.
I hear the practical point. But look, there is still the opportunity, as there was last fall. Many Democrats agreed to increase border security as part of a grand bargain. We got to find a way to reason ourselves out of this, and it's going to be involving getting tougher at the border in terms of prevention, and also more compassion about the folks who are here.
If it is illegal to cross the border, which it is if they choose to prosecute it that way, what do you do with the family?
Don't put children on military bases,
Where do you put
soldiers
them?
separate from their parents. Find a way to keep the families together and then deport them.
Under the Obama administration.
I'm
you
not,
remember the
this
lawmakers
is not a partisan issue.
Are not.
I'm just saying you need a better answer then. You can criticize what they're doing, but you need a better answer.
But why can't you put the parents on the military base with them?
I think there are ways to handle it. My point is, keeping children on military bases, separate from their parents, babysat by soldiers, is not a good look for the United States. We're better than that. We can do better.
We've done it before because they couldn't come up with a better answer.
Internment camps we did too, and that was a bad move.
You're right. So the question is, who's going to come up with a better solution? That's all I'm saying.
Let's do that, America.
We have to go.
It'd be nice. That's what happens in this
Allison
country.
always has the right answer.
There's a problem, there's outrage. Moving on. All right, here's to another real atrocity that has to be dealt with. You have violence that's going on in Gaza. It does appear to be calming down, but you remember, peace here is always short-lived, especially after one of the deadliest days in years. The international community is now asking if the deaths of Palestinian protesters could have been prevented. We are live in Gaza next.
This is the future, and it's coming at us faster than we think. From Seattle to Silicon Valley